C5 Insight is a Microsoft partner that plans, builds, and supports solutions in Dynamics 365, Teams, SharePoint, and the Power Platform. Contact us to modernize your business today.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We'll be discussing I'm a new Dynamics 365 admin, now what? I'm ready to turn things over to our speakers who have some wonderful information to share this dynamic duo. We've got our senior solution architects, Patrick Wright and Emily Boteau. Patrick wants you to know that his first adult career was as a Latin teacher, but he promises to present in English today. And
True.
Emily has recently decided to tackle becoming a rock jazz singer, and we'll see if she sings any part of her presentation today. Please take it away, Emily.
Wow, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Allison. And I promise to everyone I will not sing any of this presentation as much as I may want to. Thank you all so much for joining our call today. So jumping right into our presentation, we are talking about, as a new CRM admin, hidden traps that you may fall into. So everyone on the call today, you may be a CRM admin, either relatively new in the role, perhaps someone who recently volunteered to become an admin, and you may find yourselves feeling in this role that you're often navigating through a maze. And like the classic game of mousetrap, you may find yourself scurrying along without issue and then unexpectedly falling into a hidden trap. Today, we are going to be highlighting 5 and a bonus 6th hidden trap that you'll likely face as a CRM administrator, and providing recommended practices to help avoid them. At the end of today's session, you should feel more confident in your role as an administrator and armed with the proper defenses to avoid falling into these traps. Just a couple of contextual notes before we dive in today. We are assuming that everyone on the call has a basic understanding of dynamic CRM architecture. This includes the concept of environments, tables, columns, processes, the like. But if there's anything on the call that you hear that you're not 100% familiar with, please feel free to type in the chat and ask any questions along the way. And then also throughout the call today, you may find that you have fallen into some of these traps already, and that's completely okay. We have absolutely all been there, and that's why you're here today, is to learn about the recommended practices to avoid them in the future. So let's jump in. Our first trap for today is around the idea of not managing your environments. So a couple questions to ponder. Are you confident navigating within the Power Platform Admin Center? Are you using at least one sandbox environment? If you answered no to any of these questions, you may have already fallen into this trap. So throughout this presentation today, we are going to start with our traps and then provide 3 recommended practices to avoid falling into them. And we'll dive into each one of them in a bit more detail. So around not managing your environment, here are 3 recommended practices to consider. Firstly, get familiar with the Power Platform Admin Center. Next, the concept of using sandbox environments. And then finally, monitoring your capacity. Let's jump into getting familiar with the Power Platform Admin Center. This is truly your best friend when it comes to managing your environments. If you haven't already bookmarked this URL, please do so immediately, as you will be visiting the admin center very frequently as an admin, if not almost daily. There are a host of options available from the admin center, but the main areas that we want to highlight today are, starting from the top, environments. From the environments area, you will be able to access your sandbox or production environments and related settings. We'll give you an overview of that in just a few moments. Next, we have our resources area. This is where you're going to find your overall environment capacity reporting, and we'll also touch on that in a few slides. And then finally, from this navigation menu, we have our help and support area. We're not going to dig into this in any more detail today, but I wanted to highlight it because this is where you would come if you ever needed to submit a Microsoft support ticket. So no, you would do that through the Power Platform Admin Center. Let's first dive into the environments area. When you go into environments, you will see listed all of your production and sandbox environments. When you have an environment selected, like we have, like we're seeing on my screen right now, you'll have the option to either open a detailed view of your environment or specific environment settings. In the detailed view specifically, there are a few areas that I want you to become familiar with. Firstly, the environment URL. This is the URL that users will access to actually get into the environment. Next, we have our security area. This is where you can manage your security roles, manage all of your users, update their security roles and business unit mappings. And then finally, we have our area for allowing updates in your environment. So this is where you would have the ability to manually add in the Microsoft Wave releases when available. So this is from the environment details section. But also from your environments, you have the ability to access key settings. And so from the settings area, this is where you would these are the features that you may have previously had to go to the old legacy editor to access. And I'm not even going to show any screenshots because I don't want to instill any bad behavior as someone who sometimes goes into the legacy advanced settings. I don't want anyone else to follow my bad steps. So from this environment settings area, this is where you would look to enable features such as the SharePoint document management, the Outlook app integration. So just remember that from your environment settings, you're looking for key features to enable or disable within your environments. So now that we're a bit more familiar with the Power Platform Admin Center, let's dig into, and also accessing your environments, let's dig a bit more into this concept of sandbox environments. So our next recommended practice here is always using at least one sandbox environment in conjunction with your main live production environment. You should always maintain separate environments, and ideally having at least one sandbox, if not two, would be preferable. But that is very dependent on storage capacity, which we'll get to in just a few moments. Your sandbox environment, though, should be your testing grounds. It should be where you are initially adding any new enhancements, perhaps where you are testing out the Microsoft Wave release features, and can also be used as a playground or a sandbox for new users who are just getting familiar with your CRM application. Your production environment should be your stable environment holding your live data. And to ensure that your users' day-to-day operations are not disrupted, do not develop or deploy items directly into production. Use your sandbox environments. As an admin, though, you may find it challenging to keep your environments in sync and to ensure that your sandbox environment is a true replica of your production environment. And so, one thing to consider is if you are starting a new sandbox environment, what you can do is you can actually create a copy of your existing production environment and copy it into a new target sandbox. So you'll see here in the screenshot that we've selected our production environment and we're going to go ahead and click copy. And once we do that, we'll have this sidebar appear with a few options for copying our environment. So first, you have the option of what data to copy. You can either copy everything, which includes all customizations as well as production data, or you can choose to only copy over any customizations, so new fields, custom fields, the like. It will not copy over live production data into your sandbox, though. Fine. Next, you can select which environment you want to target. So if you have multiple sandbox environments, you can select the appropriate one. And then finally, you click copy to finish that process. So then this will help in just a few steps creating a replica of your production environment so you do have a true testing ground in your sandbox environment to test with. And so now that you're a bit more familiar with the admin center, your environments, let's review one additional recommended practice to avoid this trap of not managing your environment overall. And so this last trap here is, or this last recommended practice, I should say, is around monitoring your capacity. Especially as you start using multiple environments, you must monitor your storage capacity. If you don't have storage capacity, you won't be able to perform key system actions, such as creating a new environment or performing a backup and restore in case you have to restore your production environment to a previous state. This screen may be a bit overwhelming at first, so let's break down these capacity areas in a bit more detail so you can understand what's going on here. So to start with, when we're looking at this capacity report, it is broken out into 3 different areas. The first one is the database capacity. Database consists of your actual records, so your account records, your contact records. This will also be your activity records, so any emails that you've sent or tracked to Dynamics, tasks, phone calls. Next, we have file. File storage would be attachments on your emails, attachments on notes, and this would also include any web resource files that you have in use. For example, if you have custom JavaScript, those files. And then finally, we have our log capacity. These would be your audit logs if you have pending which records or tables you have that turned on for. Another important note to keep in mind is that your capacity reporting is aggregated across all environments. So production and sandbox, for example. And you'll see that breakdown at the bottom of this report. One additional item to keep in mind is that organizations do receive a minimum amount of default storage based on the number of licenses that have been purchased. And so on the right-hand side of this report, that's where you'll see the amount of storage that you have allocated overall. One thing to keep in mind is if you do find your environments going over in capacity, there always is the option to purchase add-on storage. So that is something to keep in mind as you start managing your environments with a bit more detail. So now we're a bit more familiar with managing environments. You may be wondering about traps that may come up with customizations within your environments. So let's talk about trap number 2, which is over customizing out of the box. And before diving into this section, I just want to bring up a couple of comments. You may hear reference to out of the box. I've already said it a few times now. And you may also have already come across abbreviations for that, such as OOTB, OOB, OOBE, out of the box experience. So just to clarify this, out of the box would simply mean if you purchased licenses for Dynamics, you create your sandbox environment, and you install your Dynamics 365 sales application, let's say. And then at that point, you effectively start using the app. You are keeping the experience relatively, off the shelf. And this approach may work for some businesses, but for many, it isn't quite enough. There's always some degree of customization that would need to go into their application. And although this next section is focusing on avoiding traps with over customization, I really don't want to steer you away from customizing your app. You'll likely always need to add in some customizations and not have a true out of the box experience, especially to make sure that your application actually suits your users' needs. The idea with this trap is just how to avoid overcomplicating the experience and perhaps making unnecessary customizations. But let's talk about 3 recommended practices to avoid this trap of over customizing. So firstly, recommendation number 1, avoid customizing the default solution. Use out-of-the-box components where possible. And then also reuse out-of-the-box components where possible. So let's dig into our recommendation around not customizing the default solution. So firstly, if anyone on the call today has somehow started adding custom fields or tables without first creating their own solution, stop that immediately. Stop doing any such thing. You always need to start by creating a solution. And just for a bit of context for anyone who may not be familiar, solutions can be viewed as a folder of components for your environment. So let's say that we've created our sandbox environment like we saw in our first section of recommended practices. And now we are customizing our environment by creating some new fields and views. We want to first create a solution to hold those components almost like a bit of a folder for us. And there are 2 primary reasons to always create your own solution. And the first one is around the publisher that is associated with this solution. So anytime that you're creating a new component, let's go with a new custom table or entity. When you create this component, the name is always prefixed with one of these. It could be prefixed with one of these default options. Sometimes you'll see new underscore custom table name. But if you aren't doing this within your own solution, you won't actually be able to identify where those components came from because it's using one of these default publisher abbreviations. So when you're creating a solution, you can create your own publisher. So at C5, for example, we could have a publisher for C5 Insight. And then that way, after we create our solution and then start creating custom components, all of the names will be C5 underscore name of the component. And then that way, especially if there's multiple organizations or partners that might be working in your environment, you would be able to see which components came from where. The other reason to always create your solutions is that if you are making customizations in the default area, you can't export that solution. So back to this example of adding customizations to your sandbox, if you want to then export those customizations to import into your production environment, you wouldn't be able to do that if they were all only in the default solution. You would have to then go back, create your own solution, add your components in, and you just cause more work for yourself in that scenario. So anytime that you are adding some degree of customization into your environments, first start by creating your own custom solution. Now, our next item, or our next practice, I should say, is trying to use out-of-the-box components where possible. Now, continuing on this example of we are now in our custom solution, your next step would be to either create a new component, a completely brand new custom component, or perhaps you're looking to add in existing components that are provided out of the box from Microsoft. If before you go ahead and think about creating a new view of records, for example, just think, do you really need to create this from scratch? Or is there an existing managed component that will serve your purpose? Don't, make more work for yourself or reinvent the wheel if you don't need to. So like we're looking at in this screenshot right now, if we are in our solution and we go to add an existing component, such as the contact table, you'll be able to take a look at any existing views or any existing components, select the ones that may be useful for you, and then add them to your solution that way. And then that way you don't need to create anything from scratch. But on the same note, you may want to make tweaks to these managed components. So you went through the exercise and you thought to yourself, okay, there is something already in place that's provided out of the box that I can use. However, using a contact view, for example, maybe this view is missing one column that you want to add that isn't currently there. One thing you can do is create a copy or save as with this managed component so that you can customize it the way that you need. But again, you didn't start completely from scratch and cause more work for yourself. And one of the key reasons to always create a copy of these managed components as opposed to editing them directly is anytime that Microsoft rolls through an update, they may push out changes to those components, and then it would subsequently overwrite any customizations that you made. So if you are leveraging an existing managed component, always create a copy, save as, and then make edits to the component in that way instead. Perfect. So now we're getting a bit more familiar with customizing our environments and looking at practices to avoid over customizing the out of the box experience. But next, what if you're falling into the trap of not customizing your environments enough? You may not think this is possible, especially with the trap that we just walked through, but let's explain why under customizing out of the box could be a potential trap that you fall into as well. So here are a few items to ponder. Are you leaving all of your forms and views visible in your applications? Have you considered modifying what tables are appearing in your Dataverse search results? These are a couple of traps that you may have already fallen into as it relates to under customizing your environments.
Struggling to leverage Microsoft Enterprise solutions? At C5 Insight, we understand the intersection between technology, business, and people. Contact us to learn more.
So let's review some recommended practices as it relates to this trap. So first, consider removing unneeded components from your apps. Next, consider setting up your forms and dashboards by security role. And then finally, updating the Dataverse search. So let's dig into this idea of removing unneeded components from your apps. In the app view, so for example, if you have a custom app that you have created, you have the ability within the app designer to remove which forms and which views are visible to users. You can, by default, everything is appearing for your table. So for example, as we can see here, we're looking at accounts and all views are visible. You can create a bit more of a simplified user experience by only displaying the views or forms that actually need to be visible to your users. So in this example, there's an option to like one by one remove any views that are visible, but there's also this toggle that you can toggle to off, which will effectively remove all of the views. And then if there's only a couple that you want visible, you can add them back that way. And this applies to any table that you have listed in your app, and and as mentioned, you can do so through the app designer. Now, similar to simplifying the user experience, one other recommended practice to keep in mind is the idea of creating forms and dashboards and separating them based on security role and targeting them to specific user groups. So with forms, for example, you may have two separate groups. You may have your salespeople and then all other users. And these groups of users may need to see upfront very different types of information. So similar to what we just reviewed by removing views and forms from your app to streamline the user experience, Why not create forms and apply them to security roles to make sure that users are really seeing the most important data that they need up front? And so you can change the form settings to apply them to only specific security roles. So in this example, we had a salesperson form, and we only want it to be visible to users who have a salesperson security role. And this approach can be taken with dashboards as well. So you can create your dashboards and then within the settings of them, enable them by security role. And so that way, if you have a dashboard specific for sales users, let's say, and then a dashboard specifically with visuals for customer service reps, you can manage those separately so that users aren't overwhelmed with information and seeing and unnecessarily seeing too much at once. And then the last item to consider when perhaps under customizing your environments or your application is the concept of updating the Dataverse search. So I included a screenshot here just to remind everyone of this search function. So at the top of your application, you have the ability to search across your entire app based on specific search terms. And the tables that are used or indexed to then display matching results is customizable. Right now, this search is displaying results from leads, contacts, opportunities, and accounts, but you can change which tables are indexed through and make sure that if you have any custom tables or any shadow tables that simply house information but don't really display anything useful for the user, to make sure that they're not appearing in matching search results. And so again, changing the tables that are indexed for the Dataverse search will really streamline the user experience and is a great and helpful customization to make within your app. Wonderful. So now we have our nicely customized apps, and we'll need to likely start shifting our focus to the actual data that is contained within these apps. So let's move on to trap number 4, which is not managing your data. So data management is definitely involves a lot more perhaps strategy and thought behind it. And so these recommended practices are a combination of things that you can implement as an admin, but also some items that you likely would need to speak to a larger governance team about to implement. And we'll go through these in more detail. So, our first recommended practice when it comes to managing your data is the idea of creating bulk deletion jobs. You can access bulk deletion jobs from your environment settings, and there are some recurring bulk deletion system jobs that are provided out of the box. But the idea with creating these processes is to make sure that you are removing unneeded data from your environment, not only to lower the amount of data that's visible to users, but also to reduce the overall number of records consuming storage space. So a few things to keep in mind there is that you can either set up one-off bulk deletion jobs, or you can set up recurring bulk deletion jobs that run on a monthly, annual basis to really help you with managing the data in your environments. Our next recommended practice is implementing a master data management strategy or an MDM strategy. All organizations should have MDM policies in place to govern their data and ensure that users are accessing high quality data. And this is definitely an area that you may need to speak to a team about as it relates to how long you can keep data for your data retention policies and any other systems that may interact with this data. There may be some rules that govern it that way. But some things to keep in mind when you're thinking through an overall master data management strategy are things such as the length of time that you need to keep records active. Do you need, if a contact was created 5 years ago and has no related activity, does that still need to appear in a view of active contacts? Or could there be a system in place to deactivate those so it's, not deleted and removed, but it's just not showing up for users to clutter their view? How often should users be reviewing the records that they own? If users are, sales managers over account records or owners of contact records, do you have a process in place for them to review their records on an annual basis to make sure the information is up to date? Those are some key considerations and items to start thinking about as you start developing a master data management policy for your application if you don't have one in place already. And then the next recommended practice here when it comes to managing your data is to review your security structure. Review your security roles and think through how you want users to access data, what types of records they can interact with, and additionally, what records can they edit and make changes to. And some eagle eyed folks on the call may notice that I did pull up an out of the box security role. Salesperson is one of the security roles provided, especially with the sales app. And you do not want to update any of the out of the box security roles. Similar to what we were chatting about with making copies of views or forms, if you make an update to the salesperson or any out of the box security role, Microsoft could very well overwrite any of those changes. So, particularly when it comes to security and you change the privileges that users have, you likely don't want those overwritten. So, just keep in mind that you can always copy, and that's in the top left hand of the screenshot. You can always copy an existing security role and edit it as you need to. But the idea with security roles is granting users privileges only as they need. So this would be the ability to create records, to actually read or view records, to edit records. And then one item to keep in mind, which sometimes is overlooked, is the delete permission. Very well, you wouldn't want end users to be able to delete any records within the system. So definitely consider reviewing any security rules that you have in place and making sure that users only have privileges as they need. Wonderful. So we are getting to our two final traps and recommended best practices as an admin. You have taken in a lot of information when it comes to managing and customizing your environments, as well as the data contained within your environments as well. But let's close off with traps you may fall into when it comes to the people using your very well managed and neatly customized apps. So let's talk about trap number 5, forgetting about your users. To ponder, are you in communication with your users today? Have you ever asked for feedback or offered refresher training sessions to any of your users? If you answered no to those questions, again, you may have unfortunately fallen into this trap, but that's okay. We are here to remedy this today with a few recommended practices to avoid falling into it even further. So our first practice on this one is the idea of providing ongoing training. And this may take many forms. It doesn't necessarily need to be a formal 2-hour training session that's scheduled monthly or whatever frequency. This can also include things such as online office hours, a block of time where you're available for your users to pop in and ask questions. This could also be even a method for users to submit ideas or questions directly to you, such as a form submission. This also could even be a town hall of sorts for your CRM users for you to communicate new features or releases that they should be aware of. So just think about ways that you can, provide ongoing training or offer that support to your users. And then with that, especially if you are starting to collect feedback and issues from your users, the next recommended practices is creating an action plan for these common issues that you're hearing. If you start tracking user requests, over time, you are absolutely going to start seeing trends. There will be common areas that users are bringing up. Perhaps users are commonly saying that it's difficult to find specific records in a view. That may prompt you that you need to create another system view for users to find that is filtered down a bit more granularly for them to access. So again, as you start collecting these feedback and starting to track overall where which areas users may be experiencing challenges with, if you start creating an action plan, that will hopefully lower the amount of issues that are coming up. And then finally, when it comes to your users, always consider implementing user acceptance testing or UAT for releases. Excuse me. As a CRM administrator, you should not be the only one that's testing out new features in your environments. You often will have elevated permissions compared to other users. So and if you're the only one testing, you likely won't identify items such as error messages or issues with accessing certain types of data or records. Ask a core group of your users, perhaps in one or two different business functions, to assist with testing these new releases. This will help your entire user group in the long run. Anytime that there's a new enhancement or a Microsoft Wave release, and make sure that there's no disruptions to their day-to-day work within your app. And now we have one final bonus trap to warn you about as we close off our session for today. As a CRM administrator, you have a lot thrown your way. It might be one off questions, issues, requests for customization. So, our last trap to avoid is forgetting about yourself. Do not forget about supporting yourself in this CRM administrator role. And we have three practices to definitely keep in mind for this one. So, firstly, I've mentioned it a few times throughout the presentation, but plan for the Microsoft Wave releases. These are pushed out twice a year in the first half and then in the second half of the year. Sometimes they do come up on you like a wave in the ocean often will. So use tools in place such as the Microsoft Release Planner to stay on top of features that are coming, the estimated dates that they may be available for general availability, and also, this release plan is broken out by area. So if you only are deploying the sales application or marketing, you can find features specific to those areas. So bookmark the releaseplans.microsoft.com if you haven't already, and make time to review this as well. Our next recommended practice here is to stay educated. So the fact that you are attending this webinar right now is a great step to show that you haven't quite fallen into this trap yet. But similar with the Wave releases, we recommend blocking off your calendar maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, and use that time to watch a YouTube video or read a blog post that you came across the other day, and try to reserve that time if you can to just stay up to date on anything coming within the platform. There are changes quite literally daily, and it is very hard to keep on top of. So as an administrator, if you can find time to block for that purpose, we would definitely recommend doing so. And then the last recommended practice here is getting support. Engaging with the partners such as C5 Insight is a very is very common and will help you, especially if you perhaps don't have the skill set or just quite frankly don't have the time to implement something new. Perhaps there's a new report that is being highly requested from your user base. There are resources and partners that can help you with that if you need to. So getting support is always a valid option if you need to, and will really help to make sure that you're not forgetting about yourself in this role. But with that, that does wrap up the presentation for today. And I sincerely hope that all of you feel more confident navigating through this maze that is being a CRM admin. And I do believe you are all armed with practices to avoid falling into any of the unexpected traps along the way. So thank you so much and good luck.
Emily, thank you so much for those fantastic insights into the inner workings of being a Dynamics 365 admin. Patrick, anything that you'd like to add before we close things out?
Sure. We're always open, as people may have questions that came up as we were reviewing these traps and some of even the recommended practices that we shared. You know, it's a it's a tough road to start down the path to being your system administrator for these systems. There's a lot of responsibility around it, and just know that you're not alone. So as we mentioned at the very end there, seek support, whether it's through partnering with another company like C5 Insight, Emily mentioned, but also there are some great resources out there for people to use around, and I'm glad you brought it up for us, Allison, attending other webinars, going to these in-person events like Summit that's happening in October each year, usually that same time span in October. So in case you can't make it this year, because you just can't work that into your plan, start looking at 2024. It's going to be about the same time of the year. We don't know yet where it will be held, but those are great places to network with your peers and to create those connections. Some of the people I work with here at C5 Insight, I met through Summit originally, and we've stayed connected all these years later. So don't feel like you're in it alone.
That is some fantastic insight. And yes, I would like to yes and all of that in terms of the Dynamics communities out there. There is such a rich level of resources. If you have a question, you're not alone. Somebody else has had that same question. So as we wrap things up, thank you both to Emily and Patrick for your fantastic insights. We are C5 Insight. Here's a little bit of information about us and where you can find us. Thanks for tuning in. Hope everybody has a great rest of your day.